At a northern Muskegon County home, the Thanksgiving table was half set, but it was eerily quiet for a holiday weekend. The family celebration unexpectedly turned into what prosecutors later called West Michigan's worst mass murder. The prosecutor, Tony Tague, described the crime scene with horror, calling it the most vicious attack on a household he had ever witnessed. The weapon was thrown into a pond 10 miles from the driveway, hidden deep out of sight of police. We're going to walk that path back to the moment the holiday mood snapped. The Pravacki family lived at 1301 Riley Thompson Road in Dalton Township, near Michigan's Adventure Amusement Park. In their family home, 50-year-old Stephen Pravacki, a long-time, well-respected fifth-grade science teacher in the local Reiths Puffer School, lived with his wife, 49-year-old Linda, a medical office receptionist known for being warm and involved. She was a master gardener and had previously served as president of the Western Michigan Herb Society. She was the kind of mother who wanted the best for her 2 sons and encouraged their happiness and potential. Within the school community, Stephen was known as a dedicated, hard-working teacher with 25 years of classroom experience. He regularly served on the school improvement committee and stayed late to help students who needed additional support. Quiet and polite, he was well-liked by students and colleagues. He was also tech-savvy, contributed to district technology planning, and was a devoted father and husband. Stephen's father, 78-year-old John Pravacki, a retired printing press operator and widower, kept his own place nearby but often visited the family. Their older son, 19-year-old Jed, was polite and well-mannered. He and his girlfriend, 19-year-old April Boss, were high school sweethearts who stayed together after graduation. They had been together for 2 years and were both bright students at Muskegon Community College with plans to transfer to Western Michigan University to become teachers and to marry. April said she loved children and wanted to make a difference in their lives. She balanced full-time shifts at Grand Haven Plastics with her college coursework. Family and co-workers called her reliable and conscientious. Her mother described her as a model child and a parent's dream. People said she was a ray of sunshine with an unforgettable smile. April's mother said Jed worshipped and spoiled her. They were so much in love. Their youngest son, 18-year-old Seth, was a senior at Reiths Puffer High School, a typical teenage boy and a B average student. He got along well with his older brother, and the two were very close. Classmates found him quiet, friendly, and soft-spoken. His parents said he was a good kid. On November 29, 1998, the family was preparing for a delayed holiday dinner. It was early Sunday afternoon. The kitchen air carried that familiar mix of roasting turkey and sweet spice. It was like a second chance at Thanksgiving. The comfort of routine made the house feel warm again. But everything collapsed in a handful of minutes. By 12:30 p.m., Seth Pravacki had gone to his father's closet for the .22 caliber Ruger, slipped in the magazine, and walked downstairs with the handgun hidden behind his back. At 12:45, his father left to pick up Seth's grandfather for the Thanksgiving dinner. In the living room, Seth's brother Jed sat on the couch watching TV. Seth came up behind his brother and shot him in the back of the head, then moved him to the basement so no one would see him. Then he returned to the living room and heard a car pull up. He knew his father arrived. Acting like he was just walking out of the door, he moved with a gun behind his back. At 1:10 p.m., the garage door opened. His father and grandfather stepped inside, heading for the house. Seth didn't know his grandfather was supposed to be there, but he ambushed them, and when they got in the door, shot each in the back of the head. Autopsy findings would later confirm the grandfather was shot twice. At 1:15 p.m. upstairs, his mother was taking a shower. He waited for her to get out, went in the bathroom, and shot her in the back of the head. At 1:20 p.m., April Boss, Jed's 19-year-old girlfriend, walked in for dinner. Seth later claimed he hadn't known she was coming. When he was walking back downstairs, she came through the front door before Seth could stop her. April saw the bodies of the older men at the entrance. When she stepped into the kitchen, she became the 5th victim. By early afternoon, the house was silent. 5 people were dead. At 2 p.m., Seth called his classmate and closest friend, Stephen Wallace, and said 2 words: "It's done." Wallace was someone Seth trusted. The two also played in a rock band together. The day before, Seth had told Wallace about his vow to murder his entire family, saying his problems would be solved if his parents were dead. But Wallace didn't take it seriously. He said he thought it was nothing outside the typical relationship of teenage kids with their parents. On the call, Seth said he'd made a big mistake, but didn't explain further, and asked Wallace to come over immediately. He also asked him to pick up trash bags at a nearby store. Wallace arrived about half an hour later and found Seth in the yard, crying, with a cigarette between his fingers. According to Wallace, this was typical. Frequently, when he got into fights with his father, he'd end up crying. Wallace was in shock and decided to go into the house, though Seth told him not to. He later said he couldn't believe it. He'd never seen anything like that and had to see for himself. Inside, he stumbled into the dining room, then saw the bodies upstairs and downstairs. He panicked, passed out on the stairs, and came to with Seth shaking him awake. Wallace was terrified, but Seth pleaded for help. At first, Wallace refused, but Seth begged him to help him clean up, using their friendship against him. Evidence had to disappear too. Wallace agreed to get rid of the gun and drove about 10 miles to a pond where he threw the gun into the water. For a few surreal hours, Wallace tried to live a normal Sunday. He returned a movie to Blockbuster, went home, then showed up at a church youth event. The clock kept moving toward night. Back at the house, Seth began mopping. Hours of it. He collected spent shell casings and dumped them in a gas station trash can before buying duct tape at the grocery store. Security cameras captured him there. Then he went to his friend's house because he couldn't be at his own, then picked Wallace up from his girlfriend's place, and by 11 p.m. they returned to the Pravacki home. Their first plan was to bury the victims. They covered them in sheets and discussed moving them, but the plan was unrealistic. They were too heavy to carry. So, they decided to make it look like a robbery, taking the TV, VCR, and stereo to suggest a hurried theft. The duct tape was another prop for the break-in script, but staged scenes have seams. At one point, they moved one victim toward the driveway. Meanwhile, when April Boss didn't show up for her night shift at Grand Haven Plastics, a co-worker called her parents. April was responsible and reliable, so missing a shift was out of character. Her parents were worried. They kept calling the Pravackis. When no one answered, they drove to the Pravacki home. It was just before midnight when Julie and Tom pulled into the driveway. Their headlights swept across the pavement and caught a figure crouched over a man on the ground. The figure ran back into the house. Julie and Tom Cooper stepped out and saw a man's body in the cold light. It was Stephen Pravacki. Julie and Tom Cooper rushed into the split-level house, grabbed a cordless phone, and stepped back outside to call 911. They reported a man apparently dead in the driveway and noted that all the cars were there but none of the residents were. Unaware that 4 more bodies were inside, they waited as Muskegon County deputies were dispatched at 11:58 p.m. In the meantime, Seth Pravacki and Stephen Wallace slipped out the sliding glass door and bolted toward the trees. The first officer arrived a few minutes after midnight and called for backup. Police surrounded the house, unsure if a killer was still inside. Investigators quickly suspected the crime scene had been altered because it didn't read like a true burglary to trained eyes. Seth and Stephen peered at the driveway from the back garage door, then ran to the empty lot next door. After a minute, Seth doubled back to see if it was the police while Stephen waited by the road. Seth saw the cops and walked back to the road. When he spotted another patrol car coming, he ducked into a ditch. Unable to find Stephen and thinking he'd been detained, Seth ran into the woods. Inside, officers cleared the home, room by room. The table was still set for a holiday that never came. Across the street, the neighborhood was quiet, but in the Pravacki house, 5 people lay dead. Seth saw police cars moving up and down the road. He planned to circle around the house to see what was happening from the neighbor's yard, but when he heard search dogs, he ran. The dogs kept after him as he crossed roads, making his way west. Outside, there was movement at the tree line. Then a teenager stepped out of the woods within a few hundred feet from the house. He was detained on the spot and identified as Stephen Wallace. He made statements to police. At 1:37 a.m., his father got what he later described as the worst call a parent could ever get. His son said, "Dad, I don't know how to tell you this, but 5 people have been murdered and I'm being questioned about it." The other teen, the one they most needed to find, was still at large. Whoever ran had a head start and the darkness to hide him. Inside the perimeter, the clock ticked past midnight. Investigators wondered how things had gotten so bad that someone would do this. They still didn't have a motive. Seth reached Weber Road and couldn't hear the dogs anymore or see any police cars. He kept heading north a couple of blocks and then lay down under a pine tree and tried to sleep. Authorities launched a manhunt for Pravacki early in the morning, and his school was placed on lockdown amid fears he might show up. Troopers with K-9 units extended the perimeter down Riley Thompson and into the bordering woods. Police also searched John Pravacki's residence at 1136 West Summit in Roosevelt Park that morning, saying they were looking for the suspect or any related evidence. A neighbor described John as a very nice man, longtime widower who mostly kept to himself. She said he was deaf. Officers forced entry around 5:30 a.m. because John's car was in the driveway, raising the possibility the suspect had driven it from the scene. Inside, the house was neat as a pin, with no indication anyone had been there since John left. John Pravacki's sister, who lived nearby, said Seth was as normal as could be, just a little hyper. Neighbors and co-workers said the Pravackis were good people, and their kids were good too. Seth seemed nice, polite, and considerate, a typical teenage boy who wanted independence but wasn't mature enough. Wreath's puffer superintendent Gloria Lewis said Stephen Pravacki had mentioned to her how proud he was of Seth. One classmate, however, described him as strange. People said April Boss got along with everyone in the Pravacki family, including Seth. Her stepfather, Tom Cooper, said, "I just want to know why. I want him to tell me why. I can't believe April did anything to him." April's brother Adam was devastated by his sister's death. He later said, "After my sister passed away, it was really hard for me to focus on school. We were really close. Things that seemed important before just lost their meaning to me. I just didn't care anymore. The way I treated people changed because I masked my emotions." After his grades slipped and the scholarship was gone, he bounced through a string of jobs before eventually joining the Marines. Seth Pravacki was born in 1980. His parents publicly described him as a good kid. However, privately, concerns were growing. A family friend told investigators that Seth's father believed he was a psychopath who didn't have a conscience and that his mother said he was out of control. In a fit of anger, Seth once broke the family dishwasher by standing on it. The year before the killings, in 1997, a court ordered Seth to attend counseling and to take an antidepressant after he was caught stealing beer from his workplace to sell to minors, and later for shoplifting a compact disc from another store. Both brothers had worked at the Dalton grocery store, but Seth was let go in 1995. Co-workers remembered him as a quiet loner who seemed more into comic books than the job itself. He also received traffic citations for speeding, not wearing a seatbelt, and rolling through a stop sign. It's not clear whether Seth was taking the medication in the months before the murders. He was placed on probation, served 10 days in a county youth home, and fulfilled the requirements of his probation. A 1996 court form his mother completed indicated that he followed her rules and observed curfews, but it also noted that he sometimes drank alcohol at age 16. His parents were supportive, but worried about his mental health. Linda said she didn't know what she was going to do with her son, and feared he was heading for big trouble. The probation terms also required a 1,000-word essay on his goals. In his essay, Seth wrote about an interest in science and a desire to marry and travel. "I would also like to have kids one day, not too many, because I know how much trouble I get into and how much of a nuisance I can be sometimes." After a rumor he believed cost him his girlfriend, he thought another teen told her he was dealing drugs. Seth lashed out. His girlfriend dumped him. To take revenge, he put a gallon of gasoline in that teen's mailbox and set it on fire. After the breakup, he sent his ex a black rose, which she took as threatening. When a friend allegedly failed to repay $70 he owed, Seth spray-painted the front of the friend's house. There was a pattern, anger and payback when he felt wronged. John Pravacki's sister said she couldn't explain why Seth would turn on his family. though she wondered if he snapped after a dispute about buying his brother Jed's car. According to her, Seth first asked his father for a loan and was refused. His grandfather offered to help, but Stephen intervened and the deal was blocked, which left Seth furious. Detective Dennis Edwards also noted that while Seth had been caught stealing and used drugs, many teenagers struggle with similar issues and do not commit violence. Acting Superintendent Gloria Lewis warned that, as horrible as it all was, it could get worse, as reasons for the murders and the way they were carried out were revealed. Students at Reeths Puffer High School were in tears, with crisis teams on campus. Everyone just wanted to go home. After 7 a.m., 18-year-old Jana Simonelli stepped out to clear her head. She drove down Weber Road. The rain kept falling. She spotted a soaked hitchhiker with his thumb out, something she'd never stopped for. She never picked up hitchhikers, but this time, against her instincts, she did. She couldn't explain why she stopped. When the hitchhiker ran up to the car and asked for a ride, she realized it was her classmate Seth Pravacki. Jana knew police were looking for him and was terrified. Her leg was shaking on the gas pedal, but she kept her composure, pretending she knew nothing about the 5 deaths. He did the same. Jana drove where he directed, 1737 Duck Lake Road, his friend Jason Fitz's house a few minutes away. Seth said thank you and got out. Shaken, Jana pulled away and soon stopped down the road to call police. Nervous, she hit the wrong button and temporarily disabled her cell, so she went to a nearby house and dialed 911. She told officers what had happened and described what Pravacki was wearing, a red shirt or jacket and black pants and shoes. Her tip sent deputies to a rural property about a mile from Seth's house. Seth planned to take his own life at his friend Jason's house, but no one was home, so he stayed in the pole barn behind the house and waited for them to get home. It was the same barn where he practiced bass guitar with Stephen Wallace and another friend for their rock band. Officers closed in and found him inside, rain-soaked, shivering, with nowhere left to run. He surrendered without a fight. He didn't explain anything. When they cuffed him and led him out of the barn, he said nothing and asked for a lawyer. Back at the station, officers noted his flat affect. As Edwards later put it, it was like nobody was home. In spite of his arrest and upcoming trial, his last chapter was still years away.
You think of irony, karma, what you sow, so shall you reap.
At 10 a.m., a dive team searched the north end of the pond at Richards Park, looking for evidence. They recovered a loaded firearm. Within about a day, Pravacki agreed to talk, and a formal statement began on December 1st, 1998, with Detective Dennis Edwards leading the interview. Seth told him his family had been ganging up on him. He said, "Me and my dad never really got along the last 5 or 6 years, and we'd always argue, just stupid stuff. And my mom would take his side no matter what. She'd always take his side. It's just been getting worse the past 6 months. When he talked to me, he just yelled at me. Never had anything positive to say to me. I used to be real close to my brother. We used to get along so well. In the past 6 months to a year, he was beginning to take sides with my parents more. He used to tell me how bad I was doing in school, that I wasn't going to go anywhere in life. And then on Sunday, my father told me that he didn't love me anymore, and that he wanted me to move out. He didn't want me to live there anymore. My mom and brother didn't say anything." Seth said he committed the murders out of anger and rage. He didn't know his grandfather was supposed to be there, but shot him anyway. He didn't know April was going to come to dinner either, but she saw the bodies. That's why he killed her. He called Wallace because he didn't know what to do. When Edwards asked how he felt about what he did, Seth replied, "I feel awful. I wished I'd never done it. It was all a mistake. I'd take it back 1,000 times. He said he ran so he could take his own life, because he couldn't live with himself for doing this to his family." Commenting on the confession, Detective Edwards asked, "What does it say about a person who takes out his anger, not just on one individual, but on everyone else?" Seth said he hadn't thought about killing his parents until that morning, but the night before the murders, Myers' store cameras recorded him attempting to buy .22 caliber ammunition, denied because of his age. When Edwards asked why he went to the store to get ammunition, Pravacki said he planned to go small game hunting on Sunday. Seth cried when he finished his statement, But Edward said Pravacki had first tried a different story, shifting blame to his dead brother and claiming the deaths came from a pact to take their own lives that went wrong, a narrative where he wasn't at the center. Seth Pravacki was charged with 5 counts of open murder. Bond was set at $5 million. Prosecutor Tony Tague called both suspects extremely dangerous and described the crime scene as one of the most brutal he had ever seen. People in the courtroom wept as details were revealed. Neither suspect showed emotion. Pravacki wrote in a letter, "I doubt that I'll go to jail." He pleaded no contest, acknowledging it would be treated as a guilty plea for sentencing. As the judge read the victims' names, Pravacki looked down and bit his lip. He seemed near tears at moments, speaking barely above a whisper, but kept his composure. Pravacki apologized.
"I'm sorry for what I did, but that's hardly enough."
Wallace was upset. He told jurors, "I wasn't using the best judgment that day after I saw what I saw. I figured he'd be caught one way or another, and I tried to pretend I didn't know about it. I wish now I would have contacted authorities." Wallace testified he was scared he might die because Pravacki told him he had killed April Boss because she walked in on the killings. Seth Pravacki was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He asked the judge for a chance to be released briefly so he could travel before beginning his sentence, saying, "I would just like a chance to get out and see the world before I go away for a very long time." His request was denied. Tony Tague said, "One of his major concerns, as opposed to the welfare of his family, is he's never going to get out of jail. Pravacki is lucky Michigan doesn't have the death penalty. This is certainly a case that merits it." For Stephen Wallace, prosecutors initially mirrored the charges, then later reduced them to being an accessory. His bond dropped from $5 million to $500,000, and he was released pending trial to his parents. With the murder counts dismissed, Wallace still faced up to 7 years for allegedly helping stage the scene. His mother, Deborah Wallace, later said taking the gun from Pravacki may have prevented further violence, while his father said Wallace reacted out of fear, shock, and denial. Prosecutors argued that Wallace left and had multiple chances to alert authorities, and noted he accepted $300 from Pravacki for his help. The jury ultimately acquitted him, finding the state hadn't proven its case or his intent beyond a reasonable doubt, in part because the focus drifted toward the homicide rather than the alleged assistance. Tony Tague said an exhaustive investigation showed Pravacki alone was responsible for the killings. Wallace's role was limited to the cover-up. Wallace's attorney Terry Nolan said he hoped to get his client back to school. He said, "He's a senior in high school in good standing. He was a victim like the others. He got thrown into this situation." After the acquittal, Wallace still faced a misdemeanor property destruction case. He pleaded no contest and was ordered to pay restitution, fines, and costs for a vandalism spree, damaging a mailbox and a car on the night of the Pravacki murders during the break between his 2 trips to the murder scene. Stephen Wallace vowed to dedicate himself to making his parents proud, but his troubles didn't stop. One police report described a roadside argument with a girlfriend in which Wallace allegedly ordered her out of the car, and when she asked him to drive her home, threw her belongings onto the roadside and bit her arm and forearm. Wallace said that she told the deputy wild stories to get him in trouble. In the years that followed, court records list 3 misdemeanor domestic violence convictions at 22, 24, and 25, and an attempted obstructing charge at 24. In 2007, he pleaded guilty to receiving and concealing a large quantity of stolen copper wire, received 3 years probation, and was later sent to prison for a term of 28 months to 7 years after probation violations. He died in 2021 at age 40. No cause of death was made public. After the sentencing, Seth didn't go silent. He wrote to the Chronicle insisting he wasn't the cartoon villain people imagined, and that he shouldn't be compared to the Columbine shooters, saying, "I was not an outcast in my school. Although I wasn't the most popular student at school, I had no lack of friends. I got along with pretty much everybody. Although it is very regrettable that this happened to my family, April Boss included, I'm not this monster people make me out to be. I do have feelings, and for whatever it's worth, I'm not totally responsible for what happened because I'm convinced Mr. Kane played a role in this event. Investigators later offered two interpretations of the cryptic line: a drug reference hinting that he was using cocaine at the time of the murders, or an allusion to the biblical story of Cain and Abel. He never clarified the meaning. The mix is telling: remorseful lines alongside image management and ambiguous blame. Pravacki kept revising his why. In a 2007 letter, he claimed that he was coming down off a strong dose of LSD when jailed, and that he'd been on LSD during the murders. When it wore off, he vomited and wanted to die. Law enforcement didn't buy it. Investigators pointed out that when they questioned him right after the murders, he never said anything about being high. He didn't describe a drug haze, he described anger. He admitted in his letter that he started drinking and using marijuana at 14, then moved to LSD and speed by 16, and that he also sold drugs and was promiscuous in high school, a self-portrait of escalating risk-taking even before the murders. He said he started dealing to support himself and his habit. He was housed at Kinross in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, working afternoons on the yard crew, raking leaves, cutting grass, shoveling, routine groundskeeping, and living a watched, clockwork life in a medium-security four-man cell. He had access to television, the library, educational and vocational courses, the gym, and outdoor recreational activities. He also had some visitors. However, he complained about the boredom and the food. From jail, Seth tried to spin the attention to his advantage. In a letter, he urged a fellow Wreaths Puffer high school student and bandmate to shop their demo to local radio stations. He wrote, "Make sure you make it clear that Steve Wallace and me are in the band. This is our chance to make it big." He insisted he wasn't mentally ill, saying, "No, I'm not insane. I'm still the same person." In prison, he began telling people he'd found faith. In a letter, he wrote, "My parents raised me with an atheistic or agnostic view of life. I never had a lot of friends and was antisocial as early as grade school. I was considered a troublemaker and often found myself in the principal's office." He blamed that upbringing for the shootings. He said that after meeting Christian volunteers in jail, his heart started to turn to Christ. He read scripture and was baptized in the cell block shower. He said accepting God's word was the only way he could deal with knowing he would die in prison. Detective Edwards said, "Everybody who goes to prison gets religion." In the letter, Seth wrote that coming to terms with the fact he was going to die in prison was a struggle for him. Through reading God's word, he found a glimmer of peace and comfort. To him, that conversion story was his answer to, how do you live with that? Seth's father called him a psychopath, and that word seemed to hang over everything that came next. Because his behavior didn't look like a quiet man who had surrendered to God. It looked like a predator learning a new environment. Prison records show a very different Seth Pravacki than the peace and comfort voice in his letters. He racked up misconducts, not one or two slips. Officials said he had about 32 misconduct citations in custody, and not for minor rule breaking. They included theft, fighting, assaulting another inmate, substance abuse in prison, gambling, possessing a weapon, getting caught with a razor blade, and running a tattoo gun. He himself admitted part of this in writing. He described prison as a predator-prey environment where the strong take advantage of the weak. He said, "I've been involved in fights and assault. I have extorted other convicts for money, and I was involved in the drug trade." He said he lifted weights, jogged, played sports, stayed physically strong. That's someone adapting. He got tossed into segregation for contraband. He got out. He got tossed back. He kept moving inside that world, not shrinking in it. Psychologically, the later years read like a struggle between reinvention and inertia. The misconducts show impulse, defiance, and a readiness to bend rules when he thought he could get away with it. Prison didn't freeze Seth Pravacki in the moment he was arrested. It turned him into something else, and depending on who you ask, that something else was either remorse, performance, or pure manipulation. By the time nearly 10 years had passed, people who dealt with him said the same strange thing. He was hard to read. Who was the real Seth Pravacki, the devastated son who said he was sick with guilt and wanted to die after killing his entire family? Or was he the inmate who kept pushing lines and building a mythology around himself? Because for someone who supposedly made peace with never walking out again, he spent years acting like someone who refused that ending. Seth exchanged letters with a woman in California. He flirted, writing, "Damn, girl, you're gorgeous." He told her, "I have to deal with cellmates, and that can really suck sometimes." He talked about music, Godsmack, Evanescence, 9 Inch Nails. He doodled a butterfly by his signature, a symbol some read as rebirth. He said he had a similar tattoo. At the same time, he presented another version of himself, intelligent, creative, intense. He read constantly. He told people he loved Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles and older Stephen King, and that newer King books were mostly garbage. He said he liked Mark Twain and recommended Steinbeck. He talked about painting and even complained, almost like a normal 20-something bragging online, about how Bob Ross could do a complete 18 by 24-inch oil landscape that looks badass in like 20 minutes, while he himself would spend 40 or 50 hours on a piece. The woman later sold the letters through a website, treating them like macabre souvenirs from a killer. People who had contact with Pravacki noted he rarely mentioned his crime. Pastor Larry Mars, who visited him in prison, said, "He grieves for them. He has a deep sense of remorse." On July 15, 2010, 3 inmates escaped Kinross Correctional Facility in Kincheloe, Michigan. One was Seth Pravacki. The others were 31-year-old Brian Davidson, serving a life sentence for a 2002 Kent County murder, and 25-year-old Andrew Ross, serving up to 40 years for a 2003 triple murder in Macomb County. Davidson and his accomplices brutally killed a young man riding his bike along a street in Wyoming, Michigan, and took his duffel bag, which contained a radio and a bottle of whiskey. Ross murdered his parents and a brother when he was 18. The inmates were ready to do anything to get away, and someone could be hurt. Kinross already had a history of escape attempts. In 2007, 4 inmates nearly tunneled out of their cell and came within 6 feet of the outer line. This time, shortly after 9 a.m., the trio overpowered a truck driver at the prison's food service loading dock, took his keys, and drove the truck through the fence in an attempt to escape. The driver was treated for non-life-threatening injuries. Witnesses said the trio drove back and forth on the grounds while trying to get the truck in gear, then built enough speed to ram the east fence topped with razor wire. The vehicle tore up the fencing but got wrapped up in the fence and stopped after roughly 100 yards. Prison officials said the barrier sustained heavy damage, but ultimately did its job. All 3 inmates jumped out and ran. Officers ordered them to stop. Brian Davidson and Andrew Ross surrendered immediately and were taken back into custody. 30-year-old Seth Pravacki ignored the guards' commands and kept running toward a nearby medical clinic, raising concerns about potential hostages. A corrections officer fired, and Pravacki was fatally shot in the back of the head, same as his victims. It was the last page of a story he wrote himself. Do you think Seth Pravacki acted on impulse during his Thanksgiving massacre, or was it calculated? What would you have done in Wallace's place? Tell me in the comments. Watch the playlist for more chilling murder documentaries, and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime case.